I was extremely privileged to be allowed by the RAF to captain a 4-engine aircraft with a crew of 8 at the age of 21. And I warned the gunners. I said, there's a fighter right underneath us now. The Germans put before me the most gorgeous German girl who offered all.
Welcome to the Fighting High podcast. And what better way to open Series 2 for this Their Story episode than to hear directly from one of those who flew and fought the Second World War air battle in the iconic Avro Lancaster, Pathfinder pilot Andrew Desmond Pelly DFC. In 2010 I interviewed Desmond, known by his middle name, for the book Bomber Command Failed to Return, in which we covered his training, operational career and prisoner of war life. Born in August 1923 in Godstone, Surrey, Desmond was educated at Charterhouse School.
While I was there, an RAF selection board for aircrew came round and I was interviewed, and I was accepted by that selection board for training as aircrew. There were several of us who were very good friends, who were very interested in speed in general. We were all members of Brooklands. When the war started, we all were very interested in flying. And so I and several of my friends joined the Air Force. When I was approaching 18, obviously I had to do something because there was a war on. I was not interested in going into the Army, nor the Navy, because I'm extremely seasick at sea. And therefore, the RAF was a natural for me, particularly as I'd already been accepted at school for aircrew training.
Desmond joined the Royal Air Force on his 18th birthday, and in 1942 he was called up.
We all went to Lord's Cricket Ground, where we were kitted out and had a number of injections and that sort of thing. And then I went up to Scarborough, where we did a certain amount of square bashing, as you might go, marching up and down, and discipline and fitness, getting fit, and also doing a certain number of exercises for mathematics and that type of thing, and a few navigational exercises and that sort of thing. It was a very basic training.
Desmond was then posted to Carlisle to start his pilot training,
where I started flying. And there, for pilot training, you had to do your first solo in 12 hours. This was in Tiger Moth in Carlisle Airport, and I succeeded in doing that, so that then, having done my solo within the 12 hours, I was ready to go overseas to do the rest of my training.
Desmond was sent to Heaton Park in Manchester.
And that was waiting for an overseas appointment. From there, I went on the Queen Elizabeth from Glasgow to New York, from New York up to Moncton in Canada, and then that was a holding camp there. And from there, I went out to Godrich in Ontario for the first training, number 12 EFTS at Godrich in Ontario.
Desmond, now part of the extraordinary British Commonwealth air training plan, built up his flying hours on Tiger Moths.
It was decided at Godrich whether you went on a single engine or multi-engine. I was never interested in aerobatics, so I was definitely for multi-engine aircraft.
Desmond completed his training at Godrich in December 1942.
And had a bit of leave, and then went on to number 9 SFTS at Exeter in Ontario, flying Ansons.
At the end of April 1943, and having received his wings, Desmond's hopes of return to the UK were dashed.
What they did at that time, they took the first the top 6 in any course and sent them on instructors' courses. And I was one of the ones sent on an instructor's course out to Pierce in Alberta, where I went on to number 2 FIS flying instructor's course. This was not for me at all. I was at the age, I was only 20, and I really didn't want to spend the rest of the war instructing out in Canada. So I managed to fail my instructor's course by not having a voice loud enough for instructing.
In June 1943, Desmond made his way back to the UK on the Queen Elizabeth, still keen to fly aircraft with more than one engine.
I wanted multi-engine aircraft, and I'd been trained on multi-engine aircraft, and so, yes, mind you, at that stage, we were only twin engines. We hadn't got anywhere near the 4-engine aircraft at that stage.
Desmond soon found himself at an advanced flying unit, number 18, at RAF Snitterfield, flying Oxfords.
Now, this was getting used to the blackout conditions and general, wartime environment, really. And so I was flying Oxfords there for quite some time. I went up to Coningsby to do a beam approach course, and then I went back to Snitterfield for night flying. That we finished in December 43.
I asked Desmond if he ever had the impression that aircrew training was being speeded up.
They weren't at all, because this was one of the things that I felt very strongly about. Having done all that training, then there was no place for me in Bomber Command. And in fact, I then joined ATA, which was the civilian Air Transport Auxiliary, which was civilian pilots ferrying aircraft around the country. But it gave us experience of bad weather flying, how to fly various types of aircraft. It was all part of training, really, but it was very frustrating as far as I was concerned, because I wanted to get onto operations at that stage.
In March 1944, Desmond was posted to number 30 Operational Training Unit.
And I started picking my crew at that stage, and we were flying Wellingtons. We were all sort of put together when we got to OTU. I mean, the gunners came there, the navigators, we all got together there. A chap came up to me who had been on the same pilot's course as me out in Canada and had failed his pilot's course and had then trained as a navigator. And we sort of met there, and he came up to me and said, well, I'd like to be your navigator. I didn't know him particularly well, but I said, fine, I'm very happy to have you as a navigator. And then we sort of wandered around, and somehow we sort of got ourselves together.
Ultimately, having converted to 4-engine bombers, and then on to a main force and finally Pathfinder squadron, Desmond had a crew of 8.
I mean, my crew were an interesting crew. The final crew was my bomb aimer was a Durham miner. I and my navigator came straight out of school. My engineer sitting beside me was a dirt track rider from Yarmouth. My radar operator was a bank clerk from Sydney, Nova Scotia. My radio operator worked in a bacon factory in Australia. My mid-upper gunner was a docker from London, and my rear gunner was a jockey from South Africa. So we were a pretty mixed crowd, but we bonded together extremely well. There was no question about that. We bonded together extremely well. Of course, when we were in the main force, we only had 7 in the crew, but we had 8 when we got on to Pathfinders. The chap who became my radar operator, he started as my bomb aimer. And then when we got onto Pathfinders, he opted to be a radar operator. And so we picked up a new bomb aimer at that stage when we got onto Pathfinders.
Returning to when Desmond was at an operational training unit, on one occasion he took his crew over hostile territory.
One of the trips we did at Wellington, we did a night trip over France, what we called a nickel raid. which was dropping leaflets and all sorts of things. We went to Chateau d'Un. 6 of us took off and only 3 of us got back. 1 was shot down over France. 1 had engine trouble and landed somewhere in the south of England here. And 1 crashed on landing back at base. So of the 6 that went, only 3 of us got back in one piece, actually.
I asked Desmond about accidents during training.
We were lucky. Personally, we didn't have any accidents, but yes, there were a few. I mean, I do remember one Wellington crashing and killed the whole crew, but, yes, there were accidents.
And did it affect the crew's morale?
Not at all. No, it was just, he shrugged it off and said, well, let's hope it doesn't happen to us, sort of thing, and that was it.
Midway through June 1944, Desmond and his crew were sent to number 1667 Conversion Unit at RAF Sandtoft, Lincolnshire, to gain experience on 4-engine aircraft, flying the Handley Page Halifax bomber. The crew began to bond, the personalities and abilities moulded into a team, and Desmond, as captain, established their modus operandi.
We were a very closely knit crew, there's no question about it, and we all got on extremely well together, and inevitably there would be odd argument, this, that, and the other, but I mean, there was nothing vicious about it at all. If we went operating or doing anything like that, we go off to the pub together, and if one of the crew had a birthday, well, we celebrated that in quite a big way. So, yes, we got on very well together. We were all socialising together, and it was nothing like, officers and other ranks. We were a crew, and we were going to work together, and that was it. And the closer you got together, the more efficient you became as an operational crew.
I asked Desmond what his approach was, as captain of the aircraft, to discipline in the air.
I was extremely strict. I would not allow any of the crew to talk other than on the business we were doing. In other words, if they had something they had to say about the operation, such as the navigator giving me a course, or the radio operator telling me he got a message on the radio, or the gunners warning me about fighters or that sort of thing, sure, fine, but no back chat at all. I spoke to every member of the crew. It would be every 10 minutes I would make sure that they were awake and on the ball, and also making sure they had their oxygen supply, which was very important. We did have one occasion where the navigator passed out because he'd pinched his oxygen tube leaning against his table, and he passed out completely. So we pumped oxygen in him and he recovered. But I was always making sure that they were awake and on the ball.
On 17th of July, Desmond transferred with his crew to No. 1 Lancaster Finishing School at RAF Hemswell, Lincolnshire. And his view of the Lancaster?
Oh, yes. I mean, the Lancaster was the finest bomber that ever was made at that time. There's no question about it. I was very, very impressed with the Lancaster. Yeah, it was a beautiful aeroplane.
On 10th of August, Desmond arrived at No. 100 Squadron at RAF Waltham, Lincolnshire. I asked Desmond if they were keen to start operations.
Oh, yes, very much so. I mean, this was what we'd been training for, to get onto operation, and I think we were all very pleased to get onto operation, get onto our operational squadron.
But he quickly came to appreciate that morale appeared very low at the squadron, owing to considerable losses.
A very good friend of mine who I knew before the war, he and I joined the squadron on virtually the same day. I'd known him before the war, and he and I had gone right through training, more or less together. I met him again when we were converting onto Halifaxes, and as I say, we joined the 100 Squadron almost on the same day. I had some leave immediately, and I went off for a few days. And when I came back, he was missing on his very first trip, which was quite a bit of a shocker, shall we say, to somebody who at that stage hadn't actually done an operation.
Desmond's first operation was for him a familiarisation flight, accompanying another crew to Russelheim on the 25th of August. I asked him to describe the hours leading up to an operational sortie.
You went down to your squadron office, or your flight office, in the morning, and then you would be told whether you were on for that night. And then the first thing you did, you went and air tested your aircraft to make quite sure everything worked. I made sure the engines worked and the guns worked and everything was in tip-top condition. Then, having done that and satisfied yourself that it was all right, and if it wasn't, you told your ground crew what you thought needed doing, and then you'd be called to briefing, depending on what time you were actually going to leave that night, what time the briefing was. And then you were told where you were going, you were told what the weather was like, you were told what courses and the route you were going to take to your destination. And then, having got your briefing, the navigator would get busy on working out his courses and that sort of thing. The radio operator would pick up all the necessary information that he needed. And as a pilot, I usually tried to go and get some rest. I used to go and lie down for an hour or so because, the pilot has to be on the ball for the next number of hours, whatever it's going to be. And so I always tried to get a bit of a rest before going out into operation. And then, of course, you had your eggs and bacon before you went. And then you got yourself ready for actually going out to the aircraft. And the WAF girls used to drive us out to the aircraft. And then you chatted with your ground crew out there until it was time to start the engines and taxi out and go.
I asked Desmond how he felt prior to flying operations, particularly that first sortie.
One was nervous, there's no question about it. But once you got in the aircraft and you were flying, then you forgot that. You were too busy doing your job in the aircraft. I do remember so well on this Russelheim trip I did as my first operation as a familiarization. I do remember approaching the target and thinking, that's dangerous. How are we going to get through all that? Anyway, we did get through it. We got back, and that was just my first sort of impression, shall we say.
Desmond's next operation, this time with his crew, was to Stettin, a 9-hour trip.
I remember coming back how very tired I was, and so were the crew. And I had to keep them on the ball right the way back, not go to sleep or anything like that. The other thing I was very, very strict about, that there was absolutely no smoking in the aircraft at all. I know the crew some of them wanted to have a smoke once they got below oxygen height, but no way was I going to have any smoking in the aircraft. I'm very strict. If I ever smelt cigarette smoke in the aircraft, I blew my tom.
Further raids followed in September 1944, and on 12th of September...
Then we did a one to Frankfurt, and we had 4 combats with fighters that night. This was, just over a 7-hour flight. I do know my gunners claimed that they had shot 1 fighter down, but we couldn't actually claim it because we didn't actually see it hit the ground. I suppose my tail gunner must have been off sick or something, but we had a spare gunner on that night. I don't remember a lot about it, apart from the fact, you got a bit fed up with fighters attacking you, and had it 4 times. I don't wonder how many more times we were going to have it. But we got away with it. We weren't badly damaged or anything. Well, yes, we did a lot of corkscrewing, yes. I mean, it was corkscrewing the whole time with their fighters after us. So a bit uncomfortable for the crew.
On the 23rd of September, the crew went to Neuse, Desmond's 11th operational sortie.
Apparently we were hit by anti-aircraft shell that night.
His last stop with 100 Squadron was to Saarbrücken on the 5th of October.
And when we were chosen to go to Pathfinders, I was absolutely delighted. We, as a crew, were appointed to Pathfinders. Not me as a pilot, but as a crew. The whole crew were appointed to go to Pathfinder. And I said to them that day, now, do you want to come on to Pathfinders with me? Because you have the option, if you want, to stay in the main force and do your 30 operation. They all came with me. When we had completed our first tour, one of my gunners left. My mid-upper gunner left, and I had to pick up a new mid-upper gunner. He was the only married member of the crew, and I'm quite certain it was his wife. Said, you've done your bit, and now you come off. So that was what happened, in fact. So they all came with me onto Pathfinders. And so then we had a very short training at Warboys. And then we joined 156 Squadron in October 1944. A wonderful squadron. They really were. The morale was tremendously high, in spite of them having, a month before, they'd had a major accident when they were de-bombing an aircraft. One of the bombs exploded and killed a lot of chaps. And that was only a month before I joined them. It was a tremendous squadron, but we had a magnificent squadron commander, Wing Commander Tiny Ison, absolutely superb chap. The flight commanders were chaps who'd done many trips and knew what it was all about. The morale was good, and Tiny Ison had done an awful lot of trips himself, and he knew what it was all about. And he, at that stage, he was off operation because he'd done at least 2 tours. And so he knew what we were going through, what we were doing. And so, he was extremely good commanding officer. I do consider myself very privileged from the point of view he and I got on particularly well together. And I flew his aeroplane the whole time. I was very lucky I had my own aeroplane.
Desmond's first Pathfinder operation was to Essen on the 23rd of October, and I asked him his role.
When we first joined the Pathfinders, we were given the job of going in first and dropping flares to light up the whole target. And having dropped the flares, you then turned round, came back for about 10 minutes, and then around again, and you dropped your bombs, by which time the master bomber was in place and had dropped the first TIs had gone down, target indicators had gone down, and therefore you then dropped your bombs on the target indicators or whatever the master bomber was instructing you to do. So when you first joined Pathfinder, you had to go over the target twice, once to light it up and then to drop your bomb the second time.
Desmond's logbook is now filling with details of operations. On the 1st of November, he went to Oberhausen.
And we got shot up before the target and came back on 3 engines.
Pathfinding duties were extremely dangerous. Desmond and his crew, in fulfilling their role, were now at the vanguard of an operation.
You see, in Pathfinders, you started off, by going in first and lighting up the target. Then you were promoted to taking target indicators in. So what would happen is you would be backup. So the primary markers would go in after the target had been lit up. And then every 2 or 3 minutes, backup markers would come in because the initial markers would have been obliterated by bombs and that sort of thing. So all through a raid, there was a sort of backup coming on. So after you had done your turn at lighting up the target, then you became a backup marker. And finally, you became a primary marker as you got promoted through Pathfinders and became more reliable, I suppose. Then you got promoted to being Deputy Master Bomber until finally, of course, became Master Bomber. So these were the sort of progress through the Pathfinder force.
Desmond's logbook notes further trips throughout January 1945 and into February.
We actually finished up having done 41 trips altogether.
His 41st and final op took place on the 20th of February 1945. That night there would be several main force and diversionary raids, involving almost 1,300 aircraft. Desmond in his Lancaster was detailed to carry out Pathfinder duties for a predominantly Halifax raid to a refinery in the Reichholz district of Dusseldorf.
I was Deputy Master Bomber on this particular night, and everything had gone perfectly smoothly until we were approaching the target, and I realized there was a certain amount of fighter activity around us, because I saw at least 1, if not 2 other aircraft shot down. And we approached the target. We actually had our bomb doors open, and I was under the direction of the bomb aimer at the time. Approaching the target, we only had about 15 seconds to go before we actually could drop our bomb. and I saw a German fighter get underneath us. And I warned the gunners. I said, there's a fighter right underneath us now. But of course, they couldn't get right underneath because we had no armament underneath. And anyway, the words were hardly out of my mouth, and up came the caliber shells, and they went right across all our petrol tanks. I mean, immediately I could see there was no way I was going to get the fire out of the petrol tanks, and so I immediately gave orders to abandon the aircraft. We had fires right the way across the petrol tanks. Fortunately, the fighter had not hit any of our bombs. I think probably that was on purpose from the point of view that if he had hit one of the bombs, it might have blown him out of the sky as well as us. So he just went for the petrol tank, set fire to all the petrol tanks right the way across. And so I just told the crew to abandon, which they did. I kept the aircraft flying while I saw, of course, my bomb aimer was right down, and I knew he would have got out. I saw my two navigators go past me, and of course, my engineer had gone, so they'd all gone. And so they'd had enough time to get out, and therefore I reckon the radio operator, the two gunners, would have had time to get out of the back. On the other hand, I was pretty certain at that stage that the rear gunner had been killed. Well, the aircraft were very badly damaged, and therefore I was pretty certain that the rear gunner had been killed in the aircraft. My navigator went out, and for some reason, his parachute didn't open, unfortunately. And the mid-upper gunner got out, but unfortunately panicked before he got out and opened his parachute in the aircraft, jumped with it, and the parachute caught on the tailplane of the aircraft, and he went down with the aircraft. So, it was very sad. Of 3 members of the crew, I lost 2 to a parachuting accident, which should never have happened. And the last I saw the altimeter, we were down to around about 10,000, so we dropped quite a bit. The aircraft was going down pretty quickly. I mean, I hadn't got very much control of it. So it was going down in a bit of a spiral at the time. And, I sort of dived out of the forward hatch hoping it wasn't going to hit me in any way. I forget how much I counted, around about 10, something like that. Then pull the ripcord, and it was fine. It opened, and then I floated peacefully down to the ground. A radio operator who'd got out before me told me after that he saw the aircraft blow up very shortly after we got out.
I asked Desmond about upward firing guns on enemy fighters, Schlager music, if they'd been briefed about them.
Yes, we're fully aware of it, yeah. There was a time when there was a lot of consideration that the Lancasters should have a turret underneath them to protect them from this sort of thing. But it was rejected on the basis of it was weight, and it would, well, not only would it be extra weight to carry, but also reduce the speed. And so it was going to reduce the bomb loads. And so it was rejected. But these upward firing guns were pretty critical things. They were pretty unpleasant.
Desmond came to ground about 3 o'clock on the morning of the 21st of February. For the last remaining hours of darkness he headed west, and then hid in a wood during the daylight hours.
I was not disturbed at all. It was very, very cold, of course, because we were right in the middle of the winter. I had not got really enough clothes on. It was very, very cold because the aircraft basically were heated for most of the crew except the rear gunner. And so I hadn't got really suitable clothes for the middle of the winter.
At 5 o'clock that evening Desmond set off again, still heading west in the direction of Cologne, but when his leg became too painful he lay in a ditch and fell asleep, from which he was awoken by 2 bayonets.
I was arrested by 2 soldiers who were walking along the road which I was on, in fact. And of course they arrested me, and they were obviously realised that there were some air crew around because a lot of aircraft being shot down that night.
During the early stages of Desmond's captivity, he was subjected to questioning a number of times.
I had 3 interrogations altogether, one of which was with the Gestapo, which was perfectly civil. I mean, they were not unpleasant in any way, but they were wanting information. We had that night on our aircraft, we had some new navigational equipment. Now, I can't tell you what it was because I'm not quite sure myself what it was, but we had some new navigation they found there. And of course, they were very wanting to know what it was and what it did. And so they did give both myself and the crew quite an interrogation, trying to find out what it's all about. But as you know, under the Geneva Convention, name, rank, and number is all you have to give. And I hope all my crew did that. I certainly did. The second interrogation I had, the Germans put before me the most gorgeous German girl who offered all all that she could offer for in exchange for information. I can assure you, only got my name, rank, and number. And the third interrogation I had was with after I had had 7 days solitary confinement in a very cold, horrible barracks. I went before a German army officer. I had got engaged to my present wife, but just before I started operations, actually. Obviously, it must have been published in the Daily Telegraph or something like that. Anyway, but I went before this army officer. The first thing he said to me, "How's Nancy? Is she all right? Is she still in Washington or has she come back to the UK?" Just like that, right out of the blue. He then offered me a cigarette. Eventually, he found he was not going to get any information out of me, so he told a guard to come in and put me back in solitary confinement for another couple of days. That chap had got that information that I was engaged, knew the name of my fiancée. He also told me the order that we had taken off that night from Upwood. So the Germans knew an awful lot was what was going on. I mean, obviously, they must have got somebody who could report this to them. And the idea was, well, we know everything anyway, so you could tell us the rest of the thing. But it was very important that one didn't, obviously. I mean, as I say, name, rank, and number, that was it. And anyway, as a result of that, I got an extra 2 days solitary confinement.
At one stage in his journey through captivity, Desmond had been taken at night by a single guard through Cologne.
That night, the RAF decided to bomb Cologne. And so the guard decided that he would take me to the air raid shelter under Cologne Cathedral. When we got there, the inhabitants were so, well, they were very dangerous, put it like that. I mean, they wanted to kill me, simple as that. And the guard then decided that it's best to be under the RAF bombs rather than down in the shelter under Cologne Cathedral. And he took me straight out.
I asked Desmond when he found out about the fate of his crew.
That was at my third interrogation. I was told then that 3 of them had been killed.
And I asked how it affected him.
Well, put it like this, one was obviously extremely sad because they were all good friends. And one just had to accept it because this was a war and there were going to be casualties. And obviously, I was very sad from the point of view that I was sure I'd given them time to get out before the aircraft really went out of control. And obviously, I was extremely sad to hear this.
Following his final interrogation, Desmond was sent from the POW transit camp at Dulagluft to Nuremberg in what he recalled as awful cattle trucks. Desmond made notes of his journey.
Stopped 48 hours at Würzburg, civilians very hostile, machine gun turned on us, but guards protected us. reached Nuremberg after 4 very uncomfortable days with lack of water, cramped conditions, 38 to half a boxcar.
I asked Desmond about his morale at that time.
What we realised was the war was nearly over. Our troops were going, and the Americans were going right the way through the continent. We felt that the war was not going to last very much longer. And therefore, yes, we had our downs when we were very hungry and that sort of thing. But overall, we realized that we were not going to be prisoner of war for very long, and therefore, much better be cheerful while one could.
I asked if he thought the Germans had that same impression.
Oh, I think without a doubt, yes. They realised that the end was coming fairly quick. And that is why I don't think we got any really bad treatment. I mean, even when we were on the march, I mean, we were told very clearly, if you try and escape on the march and you're caught, you'll be shot. So that was a fair warning. Therefore, there was no point in escaping because the war was getting closer to the end the whole time, and there was no point in escaping. And the guards were perfectly present to us, and but they were short of food themselves. Really, you can understand that. In fact, there was very little for them to give us, but they did their best, I think.
Desmond's camp was evacuated in April 1945, owing to the Allied advances. Desmond, one of thousands of POWs taking to the road, ending up at Moosburg. On the 29th of April came liberation.
Oh yes, I remember. American fighter aircraft flying over the top of us, and there was great joy. Obviously, then we were liberated. Yes, there was great joy.
When Desmond returned to the UK, he made contact with the parents of the crewmates that were killed, including the navigator.
He was an only child, so it was rather devastating for them. Also, we had to have a bit of an investigation into the loss of my navigator, because there was quite a rumor at that time that he'd been murdered rather than his parachute hadn't opened. And we did, and in fact, I've got a letter which clearly says that the investigation was such that there had never, ever been any form of murder, that in fact his parachute hadn't opened and that was it.
I asked Desmond, looking back now, what are his lasting memories of that time?
My feeling has always been that I was extremely privileged to be allowed by the RAF to captain a 4-engine aircraft with a crew of 8 at the age of 21. We had some wonderful times together. The morale was good. We did our job, I think, professionally. Basically, I feel it was a wonderful experience for somebody at the age of 21.
I asked Desmond if the experience affected him in any adverse way.
As one has got older, one obviously regrets that one obviously has killed a lot of civilians, German civilians. But that was part of the job. The German civilians were, by and large, taking part in the German war effort, and therefore they became legitimate targets. Having said that, I mean, I do know that there were some of these ghastly firestorms which we caused in Hamburg, for instance, and you then get back to Dresden again. I've always said that Dresden was a very legitimate target because there was a lot of factories producing war material there. It was a big railway marshalling yard. There were lots of German soldiers on leave from the Russian front there. Very much a legitimate target, as so was Koblenz and a number of other targets which have been criticized as being bombed by us. So, no, I have no real regrets. We were doing a job we had to do. And Bomber Command, plus the American 8th Air Force, we were the only people who could damage the German war effort at that time. And I think, hopefully, we shortened the war by quite a considerable period, I think. Bomber Command was very unpopular at the end of the war, very unpopular from the point of view that people thought we had just done that we'd done area bombing rather than specific targets. I virtually never went out on a raid without a specific target in a city to bomb. There was only one occasion, and that was in January 1945. We went to Munich, and we were told to set fire to Munich, which we did. That was the only time that I ever took part in what I call area bombing. Otherwise, you always specific targets within a city. When we were doing this operations, we considered we were just doing a job, like everybody else. Whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, we were all doing a job. And I don't think at that time did we ever consider we were doing anything more dangerous than anybody else. And it was just getting on with the job. We were told to go out on a certain target. We went out on a certain target, and if we got back, fine. And you then got back to your eggs and bacon and had a night in the pub the next night and that sort of thing. You were just doing a job as far as I was concerned at that stage. And that, I think, was what my crew felt.
When I interviewed Desmond in 2010, the campaign for the Bomber Command Memorial in London was gathering pace. I asked him if he felt a sense of injustice about the previous lack of recognition for Bomber Command.
No, the answer is I had never really thought about it. I understand now that it's probably a very good thing to have a memorial for Bomber Command. I think it's sad it's so late, over 70 years, or about 70 years after it all happened. But nevertheless, one's got to remember, out of 125,000 air crew members who took part in the European bombing offensive, over 55,000 of them were killed. And therefore, yes, there should be a memorial, but it's a great pity that it hasn't happened earlier when there were more of Bomber Command survivors.
Thank you for listening to the Fighting High podcast. Desmond Pelly's story is told by me, Steve Darlow, in the book Bomber Command Failed to Return, published by Fighting High. If you have enjoyed this podcast, then please like, follow and subscribe. You can follow Fighting High on X using @FightingHigh, visit fightinghigh.com for details about books, and follow the Fighting High publishing page on Facebook.